Welcome back, everybody, to the Inking Out Loud podcast. Once again, this will be episode 8. I want to say I'm starting to lose track. My name is Rob Santos.
And I'm Drew McCaffrey.
And I am Meg McCaffrey.
We have a special guest here today. Meg has been reading Warbreaker for the very first time. And
yes.
Rob and I are veterans. Rob a little more so than me, but
we're old hands.
Yeah.
I've read it a few more times, but Drew's a little smarter than I am, so we should balance each other out nicely. What exactly are we going to be starting off with? Because we have so much to talk about today, especially with the end of this book and how much happens. By the way, clearly we will be spoiling the events in Brandon Sanderson's Warbreaker pretty heavily. We'll be discussing them at length, everything that happens in the book, including a few annotations. I went through and read a lot of the annotations from Brandon as well. But for those who have not read the other Wider Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson, we won't be discussing too much outside of this particular shard world, as it'll be referred to. I believe, Meg, you've only read the Stormlight Archive book 1, right?
Correct.
Am I understanding that correctly? Okay, good. So we can touch a little bit into the Stormlight Archive here and there with our Cosmere connections, but for the most part, this will be a pretty Cosmere-wide spoiler-free zone.
yes.
For this episode specifically, yes. Is there anything you want to get out of the way first? We have a few things that we like to do now, like reactions, in-depth discussions about individual characters. I have to admit, I started pre-drinking a little bit first, so I'm not quite sure exactly where we're going to start today. But let's dive into it. So Warbreaker, we've finished it.
I think we should kick off with Vivenna, personally.
Sure.
She really is
solid starting
the
point.
main thrust of the second half of this book is all about Vivenna and Vasher. Whereas
Absolutely.
Lightsong and Ciri, I mean, they have their roles, but they were much more involved in the setup of this book.
Yeah.
And when we get to Ciri in a little bit, I have something specifically to say there. But Vivenna is a particularly active, dynamic character. She changes a lot during the second half of this book. Mm-hmm. We see basically it kicks off where we left off with her getting kidnapped by Vasher is like one of the first things in the second half here, and then she escapes and realizes it may not have been all that much of an escape as she
No, it wasn't.
Discovers Denth and Tongfa and Jules and their duplicity.
Yeah.
So
that scene for me, I really did not see Denth's betrayal coming.
He's so jovial. He's so.
Yeah, he's,
you know
and
what
I mean, what got me was that I was so annoyed by his humor. But
really?
I was putting up with his humor because it was just the same line over and over again.
You know what I hate
like
most
the
about
thing
being a
about
mercenary?
mercenaries, and I was getting sick of it, and I was really kind of hoping that I wasn't going to have to listen to it for the rest of the book. And you know what, Sanderson? Thank you for that.
So, I have a question actually about the thing about mercenary, or the worst thing about mercenaries is, how did you feel, Meg, about that delivery of that line, not in a humorous setting, as that reveal unfolded?
For me, it was terrifying. Like,
it was
that whole
sinister
scene
moment.
Was, for me, the height of Vivenna's terror. More so than getting kidnapped, really, I think more than anything else that she experiences, those realizations of what was actually happening, who she was really there with. Realizing her friend was dead, seeing like the corpses of Tongfa's animals.
That was.
It was just so. It was so scary.
I remember.
And it was for me, it was actually chilling. I froze up as a reader a little bit. Like, I don't know what I would have done in that situation. The fact that she was able to think of anything at all is to me a really great turning point for her. Mm-hmm. And the beginning of who she becomes towards the end. But oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was definitely an eerie kind of chill. Like you said, chilling. That's the exact word I would have used. As soon as Denth comes out with that line, you know what I hate most about being a mercenary, and you realize that all is not exactly what you thought it was. Mm-hmm. That's a very, very real moment. And I forgot, until I had reread it, just how eerie it was. Like, Vivenna, at this point, she just can't get a break. I mean, there's this strange guy that's been following her through the city. He's all dressed up like a hobo. He's got just raggedy clothes. He's got the beard. She can sense him looking at her, even though she doesn't know he's there to begin with. He's got this creepy talking sword.
Right.
And now, after she gets kidnapped by this man, she finally manages to escape, thinking, okay, she's escaped death or worse, and she just falls right back into the clutches of this mercenary gang, who has, since she has gone, revealed their true colors. Because, they assumed Parlin knew where she went.
Right.
And that's right. And poor Parlin, and I read during the annotations.
God,
Brandon really hated what he had to do to Parlin. Like, he wanted to flesh him out as a character, apparently a little bit more. There just wasn't a whole lot of room in this narrative to explore that character a bit more. Parlin is a character who really just kind of got, the greasy end of the stick all around. Poor guy. And what I found creepiest, specifically, while we're still on this scene, about this scene, actually, was Tonkfa. He had a very specific line. And I'm just suddenly drawing a blank on it. Oh my god. I'm brain farting right now. Well, I think it was something about the rope and how a rope can be used to burn flesh.
That's
later.
a little later
That's
on.
later.
It's a little later on.
Is it a little later on?
It's when when Vivenna gets into the room to rescue Vasher, and it goes not great.
Yes.
No, I'm sorry. I just remembered what it was. Tonkfa was involved, but it was still a line from Denth, and he was apologizing to Vivenna, saying that Parlin's death was actually an accident.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, things got a little out of hand.
He was tortured to death. Things got a little out of hand. You mean to tell me that was an accident?
Yeah.
But according to the annotations, it actually was. Denth wasn't present, and he was really pissed off at Tonkfa when he got back and saw that Tonkfa had taken it a little too far.
I think that one of the great things about Denth as a character is that you realize how evil he is, because there's that conflict. This man who is so humorous and so friendly and has been taking care of Vivenna, or she thinks she's been taken care of by him.
Yeah.
And he's saying that he hates being a mercenary and things get out of hand, and he repeats these kinds of lines, but yet he still does these horrible things, which is an interesting, I think, juxtaposition with Vasher, who is not good with words, as he says. Like, he doesn't say the right thing. He barely says anything at all when he's put on the spot like that. But Vasher, he seems to have a much more coherent character, a much more coherent moral compass than Denth, who is conflicted.
To an extent, though, because Vasher does have a couple of scenes talking with Nightblood where Nightblood points out the kind of hypocrisy in Vasher's actions, like when Vasher breaks into the palace, into the God King's palace, and he chokes the girl out, and Nightblood's like, you don't want to do any of this violent stuff, but then you're just fine with choking this girl out with an awakened rope, like, what? And Vasher's like, yeah, I know, I don't get it either. And
there is that scene.
But so going back to that reveal with Vivenna and Tonkfa and Denth, and that specific line where Denth has this catchphrase, and then Brandon takes the catchphrase and repeats it, but in completely different circumstances and in a completely different tone. And it's this really subtle, but at the same time heavy-handed literary device where Brandon, in a lot of ways, Brandon is not necessarily the most subtle writer, especially when it comes to his humor.
I'd agree with that.
And that line is a really good example. This repeated, hit you over the head. You know what I hate about mercenary?
I love that line. I love that line.
It's very direct, unsubtle humor, but then it's twisted in this subtle way to make it terrifying. And he handles that really, really well.
Yeah, because up to this point, you're used to getting a little ha when you read that line. Or if you're not a big fan, you're just like, oh my God,
roll your eyes a little.
But at this point, you're right. It's the exact same words presented in a totally different way. And that in itself, because that kind of pseudo familiarity you have, but then you're seeing these true colors kind of bleed out from if you'll pardon the expression I throw in there. You see what happens with his with who he really is, and you're like, oh no. Especially just after she got kidnapped by Vasher. This poor girl, she has come completely around from where she started. She ends this narrative as a completely different person. Compared to the person who actually I've written down a note here specifically with the quote from her point of view. She has completely turned a 180 on her character here. Let's see here. I have so many notes to go through, by the way, today. Holy crap.
Well, so while you're looking that up, I did want to kind of go into that sort of character arc that she has, where it's easy to say that her discovery of, you know, the terrifying truth about Denth and his mercenaries is sort of her low point. It's where she hits rock bottom, and
right.
her, you know, moment of decision, so to speak, is right there. That she needs to change as a person or she's done. And that's true. But Brandon does something that I've only seen a couple of other authors do, and he takes that where she has this horrible low point where she needs to act and choose in order to grow, and then he immediately throws her even lower.
Yeah.
She made this choice, and then she has to suffer the consequences of this choice.
Immediately. Yeah.
Yeah, right away. And she almost dies because of it in a couple of different ways. And I really think that's the low point, when she's getting sold out by the beggar and Vasher comes and saves her.
Yeah, and she just loses the will to fight back. She's just like, all right.
Yeah, you know,
whatever.
she's sick, she's dying, she's starving, she's beaten, bloody, and dirty. And then that first scene with Vasher, when she wakes up, you know, a week later, she's basically been in a coma. I mean,
yeah.
And that first scene is really the new Vivenna.
Yeah, okay, I can see that.
You know, it's more than just she gets the new clothes, but it's the first time that she has an opportunity to act on the decisions she made in that basement with Denth and Tongfa. She doesn't have any agency when she's a beggar on the streets. This scene, when she wakes up, is the first time she regains her agency.
See, I would argue that point was right when she decided to commit the ultimate blasphemy, and she decided to invest all of her breaths into her cloak or her scarf. I think it was a piece of cloth, regardless. Yeah, her shawl. Thank you. And because she had spent the entire book up to this point arguing how much of a blasphemy that was, and how against her religion it is, and she finally decides to become a drab after having talked to Jules about being a drab and about how unfair it was whatever was done to her as a child. She decided to become a drab, and I think for me, at least that was the pivotal moment where she started to change who she was.
I don't know if I can agree with that, because she makes a choice earlier during the riot to try to awaken.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I actually completely forgot about that. What really is going on?
She goes through kind of 3 steps on this journey toward becoming an awakener. There's the first one where she tries and fails, and she gets saved by Claude. The second one where she chooses to make herself a drab, and the third one when she regains her agency and she says, "I'm going to learn this." And she goes out and she's practicing with the rope on the tree, and Vasher comes along and starts helping her out.
No, that's a very good point. I hadn't remembered those other 2 moments.
Yeah.
Well, there are a couple of other moments though.
Yeah, she asks Denth.
She asks Denth to teach her, but then also when she's confronted by Denth, she awakens Tongfa's cloak. She doesn't get to use that breath right away. It ends up becoming useful to her later, but she does that.
I love that.
But I like that there's more than one moment, because characters that have one pivotal moment that changes everything they believe are it's not believable to me. And that's one of the things I loved about Vivenna, is because I did not like her for the first half of the book. I really didn't, because she was really vain. She
definitely was on a high horse, wasn't she?
Yeah, and she's totally reliant on other people to help her through this, which is one of the reasons why Denth is so easily able to play her. And she's not grateful. She's not even really grateful to them for their help. She's like, well, I'm paying you, and even though there's a kind of friendship there, they're still kind of her servants. You know, she
at least acts like they're her servants.
Yeah, she still considers herself, in a way, their princess, even though they're not Indrian. But I like that there are these different moments, because all of the things that she realizes, how much she's hated all of these people, how little agency she's had in her life, she starts bit by bit to get that back for herself.
Yeah.
And I think it actually, the moment when I think she becomes truly herself is when she decides to go find Vasher.
Yes, that was going to be...
Yeah.
She spent the whole night worrying about him. Like, she's become attached to this person, even though he's not, exactly a knight in shining armor.
Right.
But she's decided to go find him.
That's exactly what I had written down here.
And confront the fact that
Who
she
knows
might fail.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I had written down originally that the point at which she had really started to change into who she was for me was when she decided to commit the blasphemy of becoming a drab.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment for me when she solidified who she was going to be was the moment I have written down here, and that's the moment that you just brought up, when she made that conscious decision. Vasher's not home yet, or he's not back yet. I'm going to go find him, and I'm going to face whatever comes. And that for me was the moment where she chose the path that she was going to walk down and become the woman that she eventually became.
Yeah, and there's another wrinkle to it, and I have the quote here, where it's not only that she starts to that she chooses to act, but she overcomes something, and she says, something had gone wrong. She slowed as she pulled on her belt, glancing over at Vasher's pack and the change of clothing he had inside of it. Every single thing I've tried since I left Idris has failed miserably, she thought, continuing to dress. I failed as a revolutionary, I failed as a beggar, and I failed as a sister. What am I supposed to do? Find him? I don't even know where to start. And she goes on it. For a while, failure wasn't something she'd been accustomed to back in Idris. Everything she'd done there had turned out well. But then she goes on and considers, but Halandrin had repeatedly proved that she was flawed. And now that she tried and failed so often, she found it hard to act. By choosing to act, she might fail. And that was so daunting that doing nothing seemed preferable. But yet, then she says, you want to be competent, she thought? You want to learn to be in control of what goes on around you rather than just being pushed around? Then you'll have to learn to deal with failure.
Yeah. Yeah, she how old is Vivenna? She's supposed to be 22?
22.
Something like that. Yeah, that's a remarkably mature thought for a 22-year-old. But then again, she, if you look at her upbringing, I suppose it's not too surprising. On the last my last note about Vivenna was actually I found what I was looking for earlier. It's actually from the epilogue, and it's a quote from the book itself, from her point of view. It says, and it's just like it's a testament to how much she's changed as a character. The quote is, "Princess Vivenna was dead. She had died on the streets of Titilar. Vivenna, the Awakener, had no desire to bring her back. It shows that even in her own head, she sees the woman that left Idris as a completely separate woman to who she is now."
Well,
and that's...
I also love that line because to me it's a sort of play on words, that she's an Awakener now and she wants to leave her old self dead. She doesn't want to reawaken her old self. I just really I liked that he used those words.
And I have one more thing to add with Venom before we move on, and it's just a piece of trivia for anybody who maybe hasn't read the Stormlight Archive yet, or hasn't read White Sand or Mistborn or Elantris or the rest of the Cosmere. She wears blue clothes.
Just floating that one out there. You know what that was like? That was like those curlers you see doing like the Olympics, where they're going in there and they're sweeping in front and they just kind of let it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right there. I stole that one from Bill Burr. I can't take credit for that joke entirely.
But anyway, let's move on to Ciri.
That was good.
Let's move on to Ciri.
Okay, Ciri. The sister I had originally liked more until I actually gave this book a much more in-depth look. No, sorry, go ahead. I was just saying that. I just wanted to float that out there.
Meg,
I liked her originally a little more.
Well, personally, I empathized a little more with Ciri. I found that our personalities were probably a little bit more compatible.
Okay.
Makes sense.
But what I really liked is how she really becomes a pivotal player in her, even though she's completely ignorant of everything that's going on around her. Like, she's not a politically savvy person by any stretch of the imagination. But she takes it upon herself to become responsible for her situation and for her relationship to Sebron, which I loved. I really like, and that to me is one of the greatest things about this book is how well Sanderson writes how terrified she is at the beginning, because at the beginning the God King effectively is a monster, and we're all so scared for what's going to happen. And I just loved that he turns out to be this, like, lovely, horribly awkward teddy bear. Like, that was just great.
This 7-foot tall, shredded Jason Momoa-looking guy who's just a child at heart, who's helpless. He's a prisoner.
Yeah.
That was one of the greatest Sanderson twists I think I've ever read.
Yeah.
That moment when you find out that he has no tongue. He's helpless.
Mm-hmm.
He's a child for all intents and purposes. Your heart just bleeds for this poor guy.
Yeah,
it's like,
you're just,
my God. And I just want to point out that I honestly think the relationship between Ciri and Susebron, I think, might be Sanderson's greatest romance in all of his novels.
Yeah. I think that is very, very arguable. I don't know if I would say I disagree with you. I think it's
that was a very impulsive thing to say. I didn't give it any thought before this, but that's just my impression. Yeah. I might be able to think of a better.
Well, I'm just saying if there's anything that's going to rival it, to me, it's and stairs. But
shit, I had forgotten about that one. Yeah,
that's
a good one.
But yeah, Ciri and Susebron, the way he progresses that, they develop this trust and develop love.
Right.
It starts off as this, sort of circling the bush, and they develop not only a mutual respect but a mutual care for each other. And then they hit that point where he kisses her, and she's just like, "Oh shit!"
Yeah.
Well, this is only going to go one place.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I loved every scene with Ciri and Susebron was like, oh yeah, sweet, a little more. Like I loved going back to their scenes. It was really enjoyable to read. Ciri as a character, a lot more impulsive than her older sister. I mean, she was brought up that way. She wasn't the one that was particularly important, right? But of course, by the end of the novel, she really comes into her own. And Vivenna has that moment on the rooftop when she's looking at her little sister in this queen's garb and her regal setup and her demeanor and everything. And she really like she reflects inside herself, like, wow, maybe the right sister was sent after all. Could you imagine what a nightmare it would have been if Vivenna was actually sent?
Yeah. With Ciri's character, so I do have one thing I mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk about, and it was her character arc. So obviously she's an extraordinarily dynamic character. She changes a lot over the course of this story. But her conflict in this is entirely internal in terms of the results. When you think about, like, her external conflict is this whole plan to save Susebron and herself from the priests, and it's all a lie. It's immaterial. She doesn't have a concrete goal that she ever reaches.
Right.
No.
And so anything that she did in this book that resulted in something substantial was internal for her. There was no, action for her to carry out. The book ended with her getting saved. She was literally a damsel in distress about to be tied down onto an altar and killed. And it's an interesting thing, though, that it doesn't feel like a damsel in distress story.
Yeah. That was something that Brandon had addressed during the annotations as well.
Oh, did he really?
Was that he was very reluctant to make Ciri a damsel in that particular scene. But he did feel justified because the plot needed it, but more importantly, he said that he had spent a few books previously making Elend, the damsel in distress, for lack of a better term. So he felt like, okay, he could take an artistic liberty, and he just because of how it played out. And Drew, like you mentioned, he did manage to present it in such a manner that it didn't feel too much like a damsel in distress kind of scene, even though technically I think it was. There's not much Ciri could have done to fight or defend herself.
She had agency throughout the book.
Yeah.
She just didn't put her agency in the right direction.
Right. Yeah.
And it ended with her having that agency stripped away.
And I think what Brandon had... Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
And so it results in this really neat switching where she has the agency throughout the book and loses it at the end. And Sesebron doesn't have any agency throughout the book and gains it at the end.
Yeah. Absolutely. It was something that Brandon had said during that exact same annotation.
Really?
He had not specifically about what you had just said. I was just harkening back to what I just mentioned earlier, in that the way the thing he tried in order to kind of not make it too much of a damsel in distress scene was the fact that Ciri managed to get under Bluefinger's skin, and that she managed to confront him with what he was doing. And she didn't manage to thwart his plans completely, but she managed to make him feel... Sorry, there's a fly here. I haven't seen one of those in about 6 months up here. She managed to get under his skin and make him feel terrible for what he was doing, and kind of abandon his original plans. Like, a lot of his original plans didn't come to fruition, and you don't know that unless you actually dive deeper into the words of Brandon and what he had originally planned.
Yeah.
What Bluefinger, had originally planned, and what took place instead. So, Ciri as a character, I liked her more because of how stone-hearted and cold Vivenna was for the first half of the book. But looking at their two characters, just side by side, I gotta say that looking deeper into the book, I think Vivenna had a much more fulfilling character arc, and I actually liked her this time around quite a bit more. And it took 10, 15 read-throughs for me to actually realize that.
It took a critical podcast read-through to realize
Yeah,
it.
it did, because it took an official, formal, deep read-through while taking notes, is what it took.
Yeah. Well, and so I want to talk about Ciri and how she's, in the first episode, I talked about specifically one chapter that I think Brandon did extraordinarily well, where he made Ciri and Vivenna mirrors of each other throughout the book.
Yes, I have a point about this.
But
Sorry, go on.
he made them mirrors of each other, and then in one chapter, in the span of that chapter where Ciri leaves Idris and ends in Halandren, and Vivenna is back in Idris, they start the chapter and they flip scenes back and forth, and as those scenes go along, they switch positions, right?
Yeah.
It's where Ciri's freaking out, going crazy, and Vivenna's normal, cold, rational Vivenna, and then by the end of it, Vivenna's freaking out and making impulsive decisions, and Ciri is calming down and analyzing her situation. And so, obviously, Ciri and Vivenna are mirrors, they're foils for each other in this book. But to the point that I just made about Sesebron and Ciri, they are also foils for each other, where they're mirrors, where Ciri is the one who has the agency for most of the book and loses it at the end. Sesebron doesn't have agency and gains it at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Warbreaker, I know this is a thing that Brandon did on purpose. Warbreaker is very much a book of dualities. There are a lot of things going on where there are clear opposites. Two things or two characters throughout the course of the book are in opposition and generally change relative to each other. They rarely stay the same. Everything changes over the course of this book, but the dualities always change, so they remain in opposition.
Yeah.
Again,
on the subject of the kind of inverse relationship between the scenes with Ciri and the scenes with Vivenna, there was a moment I wanted to bring up. It was chapter 39. It literally has Vivenna picking up rotting garbage out of the gutters and trying to keep it down as, and I quote, the only thing she'd had to eat in 2 days. Meanwhile, literally the next scene in chapter 40 begins with the words, Ciri was enjoying a meal on the court green when Trelades found her. That blatant juxtaposition, that contrast, that black and white right there, it just hits so much harder when you realize to look for it. When you know to look for it, it's like, oh my God, he does this so well, and it's just a testament to how good this guy is at writing, or maybe how young I was when I first started reading him. That even so many read-throughs later, you could still pick up on new things every time.
Well, one of the things that I do like about Ciri and why I like her character arc, even though it's not quite as dramatic as Vivenna's, is that Ciri is a good person because she loves to help people.
She does.
Like, she enjoys that. She, like, at the very beginning of the book, she enjoys her punishments of, like, having to do servant work and, like, talking to the cook. She likes to help people. And so it's because she wants to help Sesebron that she ends up being able to teach him how to read, and they communicate and develop a relationship.
Yeah.
But Vivenna, and she realizes this herself, she doesn't want to help anybody. She wants to help herself.
Yeah.
It's not about saving Ciri. It's not about saving Idris.
And she
it's
has
about
those moments.
getting her own value back. But Ciri already understands the value of the people around her. So she adapts to Hallandred really quickly. And I think that's how she's able to get under Bluefinger's skin. Because she isn't blinded by a greater cause. She just loves people and wants everyone to live.
Although amusingly,
that's why she was the right sister. I would argue.
Yeah.
Sorry,
amusingly, I will say regarding Ciri's innate nurturing side, she does talk about Fafin, the monk, and how all she does is go around and help people. And Ciri's like, that would have killed me.
No, it's all about perspective. If Ciri sees value in what she's doing, and in this case trying to save her homeland by becoming somebody with major influence in the Hallandran court, I mean, one can see how she would fit into that role a little better. But if it just comes to what going around and helping the average person like Fafin, who just completely devotes her entire life to Oster and her religion and helping individual people, I don't think Ciri could have done something like that. But she's definitely that kind of in that Goldilocks zone, in that warm middle ground between Vivenna and Fafin, I think. Which I think is why she was just so appropriate as a character for Brandon to place in this whole fish out of water setting in the Hallandran court. But we did briefly mention Bluefingers there. Now that we've done 30-something minutes on Vivenna and Ciri, you guys you want to venture into Bluefingers and the other gods of the court and stuff like that?
We can. We do really need to talk about Vasher, though.
Okay, yeah, Vasher's still one of the main players. Let's get him out of the way first. He's a little more important. Yeah.
So Vasher,
What's up, man?
the first thing,
so
let's start with Vasher's genesis. And this is where, so Meg has read The Way of Kings. When Brandon Sanderson first wrote The Way of Kings, the version of it that the fandom now knows as Way of Kings Prime, he wrote this clear back in like 2001, 2002. He's posted maybe 15 or 20 chapters of it.
Has he really
on his
posted
website? There was a stretch of them that were included in an anthology. But it's a very different book than The Way of Kings that we got.
Yeah.
Some of the characters are the same, but they act very differently. Apparently in the original Way of Kings, Dalinar kills Elokar.
Oh.
No shit.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't have liked.
There were some, but like the big thing was like the Kaladin character. His name was Marin at the time.
Marin,
he kills the Shard Bearer at the beginning, and he takes the shard.
Yeah.
And so he's learning to become a Shard Bearer, and the sword master he learns from is Vasher.
Did you just fucking ruin that for her? Why would you do that?
No, this is something that happens in Way of Kings. In the original Way of Kings Prime, it was totally taken out of the book.
Yeah, but it didn't happen in the Way of Kings that she's read and is going forward with. You jerk. What are you doing?
No, I didn't just ruin anything. I didn't just ruin anything. This is something that is no longer canon. It did not happen.
Well, that's true. It's no longer canon.
Vasher was originally written in the Way of Kings. And Brandon, during the course of his career, realized the Way of Kings is going to need a major rewrite.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I want to write Vasher's origin story.
Interesting.
Fair enough. And that's what the Way of Kings. You
what
got me
Warbreaker is.
In a Stormlight mode now. What Warbreaker is now is it's just
prequel.
Basically a huge prequel.
Yeah.
It gives a lot more context about Vasher's character and Nightblood and everything. Speaking of, Nightblood's another character I want to discuss at length as well. And it's weird to consider, this sword is a character that I want to talk about.
Yeah. But Vasher though specifically,
Talaxin, Vasher, all the different freaking names he has. Kalad, Warbreaker,
so we find out at the end of the book that he's a returned.
Yes.
And that he has secrets. He's one of the 5 scholars, so obviously he knows a lot more about the magic than most people. But he has secrets, and we learn all of the 5 scholars had secrets from each other. But Vasher has... there are a couple of things that he does in this story that... And I'm going into kind of the realmatics of this here.
I bet I know what you're going to bring up.
he does.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
He does a couple of things that's like, I don't know how this works within this magic system. And the main one is this ability to use a command to make people forget things.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
He
I was gonna bring up the scene
does
with the little girl. Yep.
talk a little bit about the ability to change his form. And at the time that I read this first and second, I was very confused. I'm like, he's got some, magical mechanism that he's using to do this. But now, knowing what we do about cognitive shadows in the Cosmere, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
and it also applies to other cognitive shadows, without spoiling anything, other cognitive shadows that we've seen in other series. Now, Meg, I don't know if you're aware of this term, cognitive shadow.
No.
Okay, so
let's dive into it, because I'm sure a lot of people who, if they that are listening, probably haven't really heard the term
so
before.
A cognitive shadow in the Cosmere is somebody who, usually somebody who used a lot of investiture, had a lot of power during their life. Okay. And what that does, when you use a lot of investiture, it sort of expands your soul. It opens cracks in your, what's called your spirit web.
Okay.
And so when they die, when everybody dies, they spend a very brief time in what's called the cognitive realm. So there are 3 realms. There's the physical realm, the cognitive realm, where thinking happens. But there's a whole
and you've seen the
world that is created by the thoughts of people in the physical realm.
Okay.
And then there's the spiritual realm. And then, which is the realm of magic and the shards.
It has no location and where all the power originally comes from. Yeah.
So, briefly, when Light Song dies the first time, and makes the decision.
He went to the cognitive
back.
realm.
Okay, that's the cognitive realm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So that's what happens if you're, you get to the cognitive realm when you die, and people who've used a lot of investiture, it's a lot easier for them to become a cognitive shadow. And what happens there is they basically, in various ways, depending on the magic system of the world, they co-opt investiture to replace their soul and anchor their mind in existence. Otherwise, most people, they go to what's called the beyond, which is something not even the shards can see into. It's the afterlife.
Okay.
So, but with the returned, as we discover with Light Song, he was given the chance. Like something or somebody said, here, take this. And that's what the divine breath is. That's the investiture that anchors that cognitive shadow in existence. But we know because, as Vasher talks about at the end here, the way you perceive yourself is very important.
Yes, and that's something that was very important for all the gods, if you noticed during the...
and it's very important throughout the Cosmere. And so knowing what we do, what we've seen with other things throughout the Cosmere, like the Heralds, for instance, we know the Heralds in the Stormlight Archive die. That's like literally the first scene of the first book. Is they die and they talk about how like they have died in the past and they come back. The Heralds
I would correct you really minorly here. The 9 of the Heralds lived. Only 1 died.
But Kalak, in that point of view, in the Way of Kings prologue, he talks about how like this time when we came back.
Yeah. They die over and over again.
Right.
It's like the eternal.
So they're cognitive shadows as well.
Okay.
But they always look the same. They're always the same people. So we have across the Cosmere evidence that builds toward why Vasher can do this, and it's all about how he perceives himself.
Yeah, Vivenna says something about that.
She does at the very end.
It's about how you see yourself, and she thinks to herself, like, that's
the scraggly beggar is how you see yourself.
That's
how if you notice, there is Hope Finder who has the body and personality of a 13-year-old boy. I think he was.
And then All Mother, who's old and wrinkly.
Yeah, exactly. It all depends on how a person perceives themselves. Their cognitive shadow will influence the physical realm. And its expression in the physical realm, and it will change somebody on how. It's another reason why in the Way of Kings, Kaladin, and I'm speaking specifically about the Way of Kings here, Kaladin, he has these powers to heal from Stormlight, but the scars are still there. And that's because he sees himself as scarred. He sees himself as a slave, or at least as a wretch. And that's why the scars are not healing, because his cognitive shadow still accepts them as part of himself. Well, sorry, you're right. As soon as Drew eyes open wide there, I was like, wait a second, I realized my mistake. He's not a cognitive shadow.
Well,
it's how
he's
his
not a cognitive shadow.
self it interprets his physical self, I suppose. It would be the simplest way to put that. Kaladin's cognitive shadow.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then so with but there's an added wrinkle to the Nalthian. So Nalthus is the world the Warbreaker takes place on. There's an added wrinkle to the Nalthian cognitive shadows with the Return, where they have to consume investiture every week in order to stay alive. As far as we know, cognitive shadows in other places in the Cosmere do not have to do that. Now,
no,
we have a word of Brandon that the Heralds don't have to, for one thing.
Okay.
But I think this is a result of the shard in Warbreaker, the shard on Althus, which is called Endowment.
Okay.
Endowment.
Everything in this world is, well, everything about the magic is about giving. You know, my breath to you. You know,
my breath becomes yours.
So
my life
it makes
yours.
sense that
that's how it goes.
An endowment-powered cognitive shadow would need endowments.
Right.
To continue.
Although interesting to note, based on the intent of an endowment and giving unto others, it's interesting to note that the secret method in which Vasher used to kill Arsteel and that he used to kill Denth ultimately was a non-voluntary bestowal of investiture.
Yep.
Right.
It was very specifically noted during Vasher's point of view during that scene as well that Denth did not have the opportunity to accept those breaths or not. They just flowed into him. He was helpless against them.
Yep.
You can force investiture upon somebody else, and I thought that was a very, very interesting thing to note based on a magic system that's, revolves around the intent of giving to others instead of, forcing upon others like Vasher did in that scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
and I thought it was pretty cool to reveal finally how he did it, because as a reader, you're also wondering the entire book, how did Vasher kill Arsteel?
Yeah,
how did he do that? Denth keeps claiming that he is the best swordsman.
And you read the annotations, right?
I read. I'll be honest. I read like 1/3 of the annotations.
Okay, so I can't remember if this is something that was from a word of Brandon or from the annotations, because it's not in the book itself. But Claude the Lifeless is Arsteel.
Yeah, that's a word of Brandon. I mean, somebody. He also brought it up during the annotations as well.
Yeah.
But originally it was confirmed via words of Brandon, I think, back in 2009 or 2010 or something. Yeah, and Meg is just now noticing that.
I'm tracking now because they say that the Lifeless carry like some of their skills from life and
some of their impressions.
Vivenna is like, he's an amazing swordsman, and that there's something in his eye that she
sees something in his eyes
from time to time.
Determination.
That's cool.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Oh.
I'll be honest, it took me until I think maybe 7 or 8 read-throughs before I found that out. I was like, oh my god! I think it was only a couple years ago when I hit that moment. I was like, how did I miss that?
But so going back to my original point with Vasher is that, as Meg brought up, a cognitive shadow, the cognitive self impacts the appearance, and the fact that Vasher's standard appearance is this scraggly, unkempt, vagabond says something about his character. It really tells us that when he talks about, oh, I'm gruff, I'm not good with people, I'm sort of an outcast, he's telling the truth. This is what Vasher is.
Vasher's a lot of things, but he's honest. You can't, he doesn't play around. He's a very, very honest character, and his motivations are mysterious, but for the most part, pure. And you gotta love these characters that Brandon comes up with, especially for this book. These characters that have a sort of contradictory personality trait. For example, you have Vasher, who's a pacifist with temper control issues.
Here, right? Can I just interject real quick?
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Duality.
Well, I wanted to bring this up when you were talking about duality earlier, but I wanted to let you finish your point, and I forgot about it until 18 minutes later or some shit like that. But you have Vasher, who has, like I said, he's a pacifist with temper control issues. You have Lightsong, who is a god and doesn't believe in his own religion. And you even have hold on, I had another one for this here. Hold on, I said Vasher, I said Lightsong. I'm forgetting where I'm going with this. Oh my god.
Well, you have Ciri, who's the rebel, who takes pride in her unimportance and embraces her role as the God King's wife and tries to use it as leverage throughout the book.
Thank you. You just reminded me. And you have the God King of Halandrin, the King of Gods, who's a prisoner, who is a child and helpless for all intents and purposes.
It's all there.
These perfect characters. Like, I love the fact that he managed to throw all of them into one book. Yep. And you got to enjoy so many of them so close together. It was awesome.
Well, even Vivenna, who hates ostentation and is internally an extremely ostentatious person.
So vain.
So vain. Like, she complains about the gods, and she's... I mean, at least they're sort of vapid and useless.
And she's the one who insists on wearing the dresses.
Yeah, and all of that stuff. Just it was good.
Yeah, I also loved like there's all these little hints that Brandon had placed in the narrative too that we hadn't picked up on. A few going back again to Lemix in the first half, who died and unfortunately had to pass his breaths onto Vivenna. And then Denth has that moment where he tells Vivenna, "You should have realized he couldn't have died by sickness." And she goes, "Oh my God, you're right. He couldn't have died." And Denth says, of course, poison was too good for that one. But even as a reader, you're going, "Oh," for the most part. I'm sure there were some really sharp fans who picked up on it immediately. But I was definitely left going, "Oh yeah, that's right. How did I not pick up on that right away?" You have the Pawn Call, who were ultimately behind everything. Again, they seemed so non-threatening. They seem so just vague and faceless, and then it turns out that this little
they're friendly, especially
exactly,
to Ciri.
And oppressed. Oppressed is a very specific word I want to focus on too.
Yeah.
Like at one point during one of Ciri's baths, Bluefingers even tells her that, explains to her how much better the lives of the Pawn Call serving girls are here compared to the lives they would have otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And these are the little hints that Brandon has placed in the book that you don't pick up on until those crucial moments very later when it's all revealed.
Yeah.
It's just
the meme.
Yeah. Yes.
So just a couple of days ago, Meg texted me a meme that was like normal authors with foreshadowing, and it's like the guy sprinkling the salt, and then Brandon Sanderson, it's a guy like a backhoe just like filling in a giant pit. And then at the very bottom of it, the little caption was, "And yet we still miss all of his twists."
Yes, we do. I've started to catch up on a few of them, but because I've read so many of his books that even now, when, for example, Skyward, which is not a Cosmere book.
I haven't read Skyward yet.
I'm not talking about it at all. It's not a Cosmere book. I haven't read Skyward beyond the preview chapters, but I'm just saying, like, starting now, I can catch on to a lot of Brandon's twists before they happen.
Mm-hmm.
Just in the preview chapters alone, I found 3 or 4 things I think that are gonna happen. But it's just because of what Brandon's done to me. He has hidden so many things from me and revealed them to me at the last second that I'd never noticed so many times that now I kind of know what to look for in advance.
I think Meg's dying over
here. He's constantly evolving. No, Meg, get it out. I want to hear it. Sorry.
In my head, after I finished it, this metaphor for the book came to my mind. So this Warbreaker was for me it starts out as the slowest literary strip tease in history. Like, it's just like, oh my gosh, just like, it's interesting, but like, you're being so slow. And then all of a sudden everything starts coming off, and it's like, and now you can't
fireworks.
Stop. You're like, I don't know what's happening. What is going on? And then at the very end, he has the audacity to keep his socks on, and you don't know, like, you don't know so many things, and I hate you and I love you.
Oh my gosh, that is the best.
What are the proverbial socks in this equation here? What moment was it? What thing was left out?
For me, it's Vasher and the 5 scholars.
Oh yeah.
Like, No, you have to tell me more.
You know what it is for me? It was whatever the hell it was that Trelides knew before he died. How the God Kings pass on their breaths.
No, we got that reveal.
No, we didn't.
Yeah, we did.
No,
the 10th heightening gives you instinctive command.
No, 9th or 8th gives you instinctive, 10 gives you mental. Wait, hold on. Wait. Back up.
But there was
mental,
but that's what it is. It's the 10th heightening. Vasher says it at the end.
No, Vasher says anyone with a eighth heightening can break instinctive commands. Ninth heightening can do something. But I want to know what it was that Trellides died without revealing.
That's what it was for me. It was the 10th heightening. Vasher says it right here. I have it. The 10th heightening allows a man to command mentally without speaking, but it can take months of training to learn how to do that, even if you have someone to teach you. I think his priests must know how, so they can transfer that wealth of breath from one king to another, but I doubt they've trained him yet.
But during the annotations, Brandon specifically apologizes for leaving this information out of the book. How the priests know, or how the priests actually managed to transfer that breath from one host to another. He apologizes.
I think Brandon forgot that
there
he
must
put
be
this
something
line
else.
In here.
Maybe that could very well be the case, because now that you bring it up, with Vasher saying, I think his priests know how to do this. I hadn't read that before. I hadn't considered that before. That makes a lot of sense to me. But what is... I still think there's something that Trellides knew that he died without passing on.
Well, maybe it's a language
that Brandon
skill.
felt the need for.
Maybe it's a language... Because Vasher talks about how you have to be able to articulate exactly what you want it to do. So maybe because the priests still kind of think that he's a bit of a child, that he doesn't have the language and the mental capacity to articulate his commands, even if they are mental.
But he already has the 8th heightening, which gives instinctive command too, though. So I think this got answered. I think this got answered, and Brandon just forgot about it if he said it in the annotations.
You want me to get the annotations? They're right behind me here on the e-reader.
Yeah, I think he got it wrong in the annotations there. I think by the time he got around to writing that, it was so far after the book that he forgot to put it in there.
We still have more of a podcast to go through, so we'll shelve that for now. We'll come back to it at another time.
One thing that I do want to say about Vasher is that I think that he is really invested in other people being honest, and I think that's why he treats Vivenna and the servant girl the way he does, because he throws out Nightblood and he just watches what people do because he's pretty certain that everyone is a really shitty person and is gonna kill themselves and everyone else, but he does it to them too, and they're the only two people who vomit. Like, even he himself doesn't... He's not repulsed by Nightblood. They're the only two characters.
The two being Vivenna and the serving girl.
And the servant girl. But he does it, and it's experimental. Like, it's a little sick. Because...
He does. Actually, Brandon brought this up in the annotations. Vasher has a test. He actually has, like, a test that he applies to people, and it's with Nightblood.
Oh, man, there's something I want to say that I can't right now.
Is it because of future spoilers? Yeah. I know what it is.
Oh man. Anyway,
Meg,
anyway.
Read the rest of the Stormlight so we could.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about this, but we
can still talk about Nightblood in this book though.
Yes, and so Vasher has this test, and he sees it as like kind of how he judges people, but that's really reductive and possibly flawed. Like, just because somebody isn't inherently, like, greedy or violent doesn't mean they're a good person. Like,
and something I didn't know until this read-through, there are ways around that test.
Well, Denth gets around it.
Yeah, well, that's because of Denth's familiarity with Nightblood. Very important to note about Nightblood, his whole personality was imprinted at the time of his inception. Just the first few hours of his life is how he goes forward for the rest of his life. He remembers Shashara, his creator, Vasher's wife, Denth's sister. He remembers her as being alive. He remembers Denth liking him and being fond of him. Vara Trellides is what that was his name as one of the 5 scholars. Nightblood's whole personality was formed just during those few first hours of his life. I forget where I was going with that, but I'm sure that had something to do with the conversation.
I
don't know where you were going with that.
Well, that's okay. Maybe other than his first impressions of life, that's all he has to judge people, so that's the way around the test?
That's how Nightblood works. Those who see themselves as evil will eventually kill themselves with Nightblood. Those who don't see themselves as evil, of course, are going to be revolted by him. They're going to throw up. They're going to be nauseated. But Vasher is able, even though he's a good person at heart, he's able to get around that. Nightblood doesn't make him nauseous. That's because of his long familiarity with Nightblood, and because he doesn't see himself as evil, but also mostly just shit, I have a note about it here. I'm gonna keep my notes open because I keep closing this phone.
So I will say we're getting pretty close to an hour here.
Yeah, we are.
We still need to do the final draft, but
yes.
I think we should probably try to find some final thoughts. You know.
Yeah. Nightblood can find. Oh, also the fact that Nightblood can find Vasher. He can actually direct Siri. Jesus Christ. He can direct Vivenna to Vasher based on his location, and it's because he has ingested Vasher's breaths in the past.
Yeah, they have a bond.
They have a bond.
And as we know from other Cosmere works, bonds are very important in the Cosmere.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. So that was a final thought, at least about Nightblood, that I wanted to get out of the way.
Okay.
Yeah, going forward.
Yeah, Meg. So what did you think of Warbreaker?
Yeah,
as a
this
whole?
is a first read for you. That's right.
So I've obviously provided my metaphor, but but as a whole, I really loved it. I loved the conclusion. I loved the development of the characters and how carefully written everyone was. Even a character that doesn't seem very interesting, like Bluefingers. That was really captivating for me. The energy of the end was really great. I think I tore through the last half of the book in maybe an eighth of the time it took me to read the first half.
No shit.
Yeah, it was. I couldn't put it down.
Sanderson Avalanche.
Yep, but I think the for me the best moment of the end and what I leave the book with is the clarity that Lightsong finds. And I know we didn't really talk about him as a character.
Oh
very
God,
much.
I wanted to talk about Lightsong.
But his moment where he understands the purpose of his second life, and that badass, awesome scene when Sisebon reaches out and Lightsong's like, "I got you, man. You are my dude, and I am gonna save everybody."
And
with
he
this.
smiled too. That little cheeky smile of his.
It was amazing. That transformation is, I think, characteristic of the whole book, where everybody at the end finds their purpose and is able to fulfill it in such an awesome way. And that is why I loved reading this book.
And can I add one thing with that?
Yeah.
I'd like to as well. Go ahead.
Lalarmar is like the most adorably pure brother.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. The way he's holding his brother's head at the end there, and they're
But
talking
the whole
about
book,
in Siri.
He's so patient with Lightsong.
Yeah.
He's like the whole time, like view it from Lalarmar's point of view. You know, it's like your brother got turned into a god, and he's being a douche about it.
Yeah.
And you're just like
every day.
Every day. But he's so patient and so loving, and so pure-hearted, like, I'm gonna guide you, I'm gonna help you however I can. And he finally, at the end, he snaps and he just screams at Lightsong. Yeah. He's like, come on! Get your head out of your ass! Like, you're killing me here. And
the whole circle about Lightsong's character that's revealed in that specific scene as well. Like, Lalarmar tells him, you were a scribe. You were not anything important. You were not a detective. You were not a cop. You were not you were a scribe for an accountant. You were an accountant for you were not important, okay? Stop chasing this fantasy. But Lightsong still has that, like that moment where he begins that last scene of his that Meg, you were just talking about, that last final scene of Lightsong's, where and I want to point out that whole circle that he comes in just during that scene where, well, not circle, it's a 180 technically, it's half of a circle, where he starts off that scene with, in Lightsong's last scene, I am nothing, I can't do anything, I'm helpless, and by the very end of that scene, when Lightsong realizes he can help the God King, and he came back for this reason, and he remembers his past, he says, oh yeah, and I forget the actual quote, but oh my God, I am a god.
That is the quote. He says, I am a god.
I am a god. And he has that realization. But Lalarmar, all the way through, this poor guy. Oh my God.
Yeah.
But he also explains in that scene, though, like, you even get a whole circle on Lalarmar there, how he was originally a priest in the palace of, I think it was Kindwinds the Honest, and how we saw how much just political nightmare was happening in there, and how Kindwinds was just manipulating people and was terrible to people. and chasing his own selfish ends, and then how Light Song, well, back then as he was known, we find out his name was Stenimar, how he sacrificed himself for his niece to save his niece's life, his favorite niece. And at the very end, when Siri is looking upon Light Song's gray, lifeless body, if you look, pardon the expression that I throw in there, when she's looking at him, she says, "He promised me that I couldn't rely on him." And even in that, he was lying, you know. And Stenimar is left holding his brother's, you know, second corpse, and he says the funny thing about Light Song is he actually did that twice.
Yeah.
You know,
the most incredible part about it is
I wanted to respect.
Twice.
I want to just pay my final respects to Light Song as a character. What a badass!
Yeah, well,
what a badass!
I think it was particularly painful because he's just watched Blushweaver get her throat cut.
Oh God, Blushweaver. There's a couple little points about Blushweaver I'd want to talk about.
But for Light Song, in the context of his character, there is a woman that he cares about, and he couldn't save her.
Yeah. That's when, and of course, because up to this point, Light Song had been taking everything as a game. Yeah. And you can't really blame him, because look at the lifestyle he's been leading for the past 5 or 6 years since his return. I mean, he's a god. You know, nothing is important to him. Nothing matters. And that's the moment I think Brandon needed to throw in there to show Light Song, like, hey, those games you were playing are not involved here. You are no longer playing a game. I hated that Blushweaver died. Yeah. Oh my God, I hated it. It was such an unexpected moment too. Like you were expecting the priests maybe to threaten her first and wait, you know, and then for Light Song to call their bluff, and maybe if he calls their bluff, she dies. But you don't expect that. You know, like she just starts struggling. Light Song smiles over how much trouble she's giving them. As that was. And suddenly she's gone. Yeah. And in that moment, you are just as shocked as Light Song is. And I guess in that moment you're also that much more in his head. So as a narrative tool, maybe that was pretty intelligent of Brandon to use. But I was just so sad about it because I liked Blushweaver. I honestly liked her as a character. You saw how honest she was. That moment she had when she was talking to Siri. And she was warning her away from Light Song, saying, I'm on to you, even though she was wrong. You still feel what she's trying to do there. I'm on to you. You're full of secrets and tricks. Light Song is one of the only good people we have left in this court. Do not corrupt him. And then, of course, as she leaves, she has her epic one-liner, you know, find somebody else's bed to crawl into, you little slut. Yeah. And I was like, ooh. Damn.
And so for my final thought, though, I kind of want to go a little more meta here. And that's... Okay. The two Sanderson books we've done so far for this podcast are Elantris and Warbreaker.
Is that all we've done? Oh, yeah.
The two standalones I put in quotes. Yeah. Thus far standalones. But they're two books that came out relatively early in his career. And for me, you know, I read Elantris just after it was announced that Brandon Sanderson was going to finish The Wheel of Time. So clear back in, 2007? And
December of 07, I think it was.
December of 07. And then I read Warbreaker, you know, like the day it came out in 2009. And then I read Elantris one more time and Warbreaker one more time. And those were not so much critical readings. And and when I think about the first time I read them, you know, 07 and 09, I was a junior in high school and a freshman in college. I was...
Hold on. 07, you were a junior in high school, and 09, you were a freshman in college.
December of 07, then I guess I would have been a senior in high school. Okay. But I was in high school and just into college. Okay. And I really started taking my writing seriously around my sophomore year of college. So 2009, 2010. And that was after I had read these books. I wasn't really reading critically. I was reading for fun. Okay. And rereading these books now, I have such a greater appreciation for what Brandon Sanderson did in these two books specifically, because they're more than any other series he's done. They're all about the characters. You know, you get Mistborn and you get Stormlight and you get White Sand to a little lesser of an extent, but like there are big stakes, world-ending cataclysms, huge armies and battles and action sequences and magic. These two books are much quieter. It's about the internal character growth more than anything else. In Stormlight, it's of course about the character growth, but it's also about saving the world. You know, this is like, you know, sure, it has some like stakes, but the stakes are removed. You don't feel the import of like what this war will mean until you get to those last pages where it's like, oh, well, if this happens, you know, all these other kingdoms are going to get involved and it's going to be horrible and all stuff. But we don't have world-ending cataclysms looming over us.
Yes.
In Elantris and Warbreaker. It's very political.
I thought my glasses were on my face. Sorry, go ahead.
And so the stakes are all about the characters here. And in these two readings for the podcast, I have come to appreciate so much more the characters in these two books and what Brandon did, developing them, changing them, and not just that, connecting them to his readers, making them people that we can view ourselves as stepping into their shoes and wondering, who do I relate to the most? What would I do in these situations? And then reflecting that upon ourselves and saying like, wow, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have been as good a person as, you know, Vivenna in that situation, or I wouldn't have had the strength of Brathen in Elantris to make this decision. Things like that. I've long in the Facebook groups and on the forums, 17th Shard and Read and Find Out and Tor.com and all these places, I talk about Brandon as being a world builder. He's all about the magic. He does that so well. But I never talked about his characters. I'm going to have to start changing that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Harkening back to Drew's earlier point about duality in this podcast, specifically applying to Warbreaker, I do want to point out that at this point, now that we've finished Warbreaker, the book still, and specifically focusing on the epilogue, how it kind of feels to me a little bit tacked on. It feels unfinished, and you can definitely tell going forward that this is actually the first half of two books. For those who aren't aware up to this point, Warbreaker is the first of two books. It's actually a duology. The second one is tentatively titled Nightblood. The first, of course, the one that we read during this podcast, is available for free on Brandon Sanderson's website. You can go and read it there at your leisure. I think you can also download it too, but don't quote me on that one.
It's you get like the Word document and you can turn it into a PDF and then into a a Mobi or an EPUB or whatever for your e-reader.
Reader of choice. Awesome. So yeah, that's there for those who want to check this out. But again, just as a closing thought here, a lot of us readers, we get away, like, I like to read fantasy because it's kind of like an escape into another world, into another life. And Drew had just brought up that when you have characters like this, when you have a more personal, intimate story about the actual changes of the character themselves, you don't have as much spectacle maybe, or as much magic and as wonder, or as many revelations. But when the story is about the characters, you're that much more invested in it yourself, and it's that much easier to escape to this other world when the door is shaped like you are, I guess, which is like a terrible phrase I want to use, I suppose. But it's just, Warbreaker is a book that I can, and I guess kind of going meta here, this is the book that Brandon Sanderson wrote just after he got married. He was on his honeymoon in Hawaii, which is, I think, where he got a lot of the inspiration for, like, you know, the colors, the tropical setting and stuff like that. And a lot of that definitely bleeds through in his writing here. But I think this is like Warbreaker, and especially Warbreaker's sequel, is one of the books I've been waiting for the longest out of all of Brandon Sanderson's books, and it's kind of sucks knowing that he still isn't going to publish it for a while.
So
because apparently what happens? What? Oh no! Don't tell me
on the Skyward tour, Brandon was asked about Nightblood, and he said of all of his planned books, Nightblood and the Threnody novel are the two in most jeopardy of not ever happening.
That was even worse than I thought.
Sorry to end the podcast on this note, guys.
Well, we're not ending the podcast. We still have the final draft, but hold on a second. Let me back up there, Drew. Okay,
Can we at
Andrew
least get a short
McCaffrey.
story?
All right, listen, what? All this time going through State of Sanderson again and again, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Next year it'll be 19. I've been waiting for more news about Nightblood, and it sucks hearing that it's so far off. Hearing this makes me go, ugh. That sucks.
Yeah.
I really want Nightblood. I really want.
I'm holding out hope that we get it, but that is the most recent word of Brandon, and I'm sure we'll find out more in the State of Sanderson 2018, which will be coming out for us next Wednesday. By the time you're all listening to this, it'll be old news.
Yeah, it'll be old news. Yeah. So that's basically final closing thoughts on Warbreaker that I wanted to bring up, I suppose.
Yeah.
I can bring up my others during greater Cosmere-wide conversations.
We can.
Yeah, absolutely. Closing thoughts, Meg?
Well, just thank you for letting me join. It was a really lovely read.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to be getting into the Cosmere in general, and I have a very specific reading list and reading order. But
thanks, Drew.
It's just been really lovely, and I did not read The Wheel of Time. I've heard bits and pieces of it, but so this is my first ever really sampling of Brandon Sanderson, and just discovering him as an author has been amazing. I'm a Tolkien person. I'm a Terry Pratchett person. So that's kind of my background coming into him. Sure. But I've just found him a lovely artist, actually. A real artist as a writer. And I'm really looking forward to reading all of the other things. I think next is Words of Radiance.
Awesome.
Sweet. Yeah, well, thank you very much, Megan. Anytime that you've read the source material or want to read the source material, I would love to have you on.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, shall we move into the final draft then?
Let's begin the final draft. I'm going to disappoint you specifically here, Drew.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, let's go on.
We'll kick it off, Rob.
Oh, I'll kick it off then, since mine is at least interesting. I didn't get an interesting or witty beer today. I haven't actually had a chance to run to the grocery store or anything. During this podcast, I have had an undue amount of simple rum and Coke. I've had, to be specific, I've had Coca-Cola and Captain Morgan's white rum.
Well, I'll say this
more than I
at
should
least.
have. I've been slurring a little bit. I've noticed here and there. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll say this at least. Rum is tropical.
It is. It's a very tropical.
We just read Warbreaker.
Coconuts that are on the bottle are fruit. Yes, go on.
We just read Warbreaker. I bet people in Tutelier are drinking rum.
The entire setting of Halandran is all based around decadence and
there you go.
Just exploring and having fun. I'm really glad I'm not a return right now, because I wouldn't be able to feel any of the effects from this.
For mine,
that's what I've been drinking. Go ahead.
I stopped at my local bottle shop. That is a personal favorite of mine. They've treated me very well. It's called Fish's Liquor in Fort Collins, Colorado. If you're ever passing through Fort Collins, stop there. They have a great craft beer selection, and they are excellent with customer service. Anyway, each year, apparently, they buy a whiskey barrel, and they donate it to a local brewery, and they collaborate on, brewing and aging a beer.
Sweet.
This year's release was with Horse and Dragon Brewing Company from Fort Collins, Colorado. And it is a bourbon barrel-aged dark chocolate stout. It drinks more like a porter. It's a little thin for a stout, but it is very bourbony. It's very tasty. It is called Next Phase. And I thought this was appropriate for this book, because as Rob was saying, this book ends very much like a setup for the second half of the duology. All of these characters are entering into the next phase of their lives. Mm-hmm. Ciri has finally found her comfort zone as the God King's wife, as the vessel, so to speak, though she, as we find out, will never be a vessel for anything. Vivenna has entered into the next phase of her life as Vivenna the Awakener. Light Song has moved onto the next phase of existence, into the beyond. And, so I thought that was thematically appropriate.
You like your chocolate stouts, don't you? I think that's the third one you've brought onto this podcast, if I'm...
barrel-aged stouts, you can't go wrong. They're most of the best beers in the world. I'm probably going to piss off a lot of people when I say this. most of the best beers in the world are either sours or barrel-aged stouts.
Interesting.
So,
I'll have to check
all you IPA
those
fans out there, there are some very good IPAs, but that style is so ridiculously overdone in America right now, I am burned out.
Yeah, me too. Even I'm starting to get sick of IPAs, and I don't know beer for shit. Sorry.
Yeah, no, when you come down to Fort Collins, I will open your eyes.
Sweet.
But yeah, so I think that that's more or less a wrap. Meg declined.
I declined.
No, it's good.
Having eaten and a drunk Meg on your podcast would not have gone well.
We have first impressions from Meg, who's read Warbreaker for the first time, and we have a sober hand steering the wheel. So I like this. I like this format. Maybe we go forward with this exact format.
Ooh, I don't know about that.
Yes. So from here on out, I think that's about it for our Warbreaker discussion.
Yes.
This has been the Inking Out Loud podcast, episode 8.
8.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. 8 episodes we've recorded now.
And episode 9, we will resume with the Rune Lords. We will be diving back into book 3, the Wizardborn.
And I've already got a head start on that one, by the way, Drew. So
very nice.
I'm almost halfway through already, so we should be good.
Awesome. Yeah. So a week from now, we should have a deep dive back into David Farland's Rune Lords world. But
Sweet.
for now, we're taking another break from the Cosmere. And thank you all, as usual, for joining us.
Thank you
as we talked about Warbreaker.
Thank you.
All right.
Guys.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.